My name's Billie James. I have lived in the South since the 1950s. I was a teacher, professor, and I taught writing, and I started to decide that I wanted to volunteer after I had retired as a teacher. And so I guess my time really began with the AIDS epidemic in 1988. I sort of came in the back door to AIDS and to BAO. My priest at my Episcopal church had contacted me and asked me if I could possibly help him with a parishioner who needed some help with some writing that he wanted to do. And I thought, great project for me. Turned out that it was a father of 3 who was heterosexual, but who had AIDS and who was very close to dying. He had contracted AIDS through a transfusion early in the 80s, but it was now manifesting itself and was full-blown. And he really wanted to leave a story to his children because he knew he was going to die before his children grew up to really know who he was. And so it was one of the most poignant writings I had ever done, and it was very moving. And he and his family asked me one day to go with them to 1917 Place, to the AIDS clinic, and to sit with them in the waiting room, in that they felt very uncomfortable not being one of them, as they said. And so I went with them, and of course I had known Dr. Sag. He had been a friend of mine, and his wife was a former student, and so I knew what they were doing at 1917 Place. And as an end result, I started volunteering in the waiting room at 1917 Place in 1988, because there were so many people that were so frightened and at a loss as to how they were going to conduct themselves when they heard the news of their prognosis and diagnosis. And along with them were their families. And so I sat and I did a lot of hugging. I held hands with them. And so it was right after that I decided that I really wanted to become involved with the AIDS organization that was then just starting in 1988 and 89. So I came to BAO at that point to volunteer with whatever I could do, whether it was helping to design brochures, whether it was helping with events, cooking, became the caterer for events. And at one meeting, I went to a support meeting, and I decided I would bring my heterosexual friend that I had written the stories for to a meeting. And it was so moving for everyone that he could tell his story. And he looked at each one sitting in that support group and said, "We are all them." And he became a very strong voice for BAO and what they were trying to do at that time. Probably the only heterosexual at that point to be involved other than myself. And so we began then at BAO with outreach teams. I went to several churches to solicit support and took my friends that I had made as BAO members, and many who were very ill with HIV or AIDS at that time, and we tried to let people know what the epidemic was really all about. Because I was a retired teacher, I also was elected to the Educational Council at BAO at that point, And so we began writing programs that we could present in schools to teach them what it was all about, how they could protect themselves, how they should not be afraid. Because at that point, all the rumors were out that if you ever even touched anyone who was HIV positive, that you too would become infected. And so it was sort of like reefer madness, starting all over again, except this was with another much more tragic epidemic that was going on. In about 1990, I helped with Minnetonka Council to bring the AIDS quilt to Birmingham. And it was at that point that we decided here at BAO to start some quilt squares of our own as memorials to those friends of ours who had already perished. At that same point, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross came to town, the psychiatrist and author of the famed book On Death and Dying. And I happened to be on that council, and I asked if she would come to a support group at BAO one evening while she was here, and she did. And I also took her to a baby's place, which was the foster home of babies and children who had who were HIV positive at that point. So while she was here, and I talked to her a lot about On Death and Dying and the books and the process that everyone goes through in grieving and in the process of dying. And I told her of a ministry that I'd been kind of thinking about. I call it a ministry in that it was something that was totally a gift for myself. And that was to help people write letters to be left and given posthumously to their families and their friends. And she encouraged me to do that. So I really began writing letters, stories. It was hard for me to gain the trust of a gay community, me being a white heterosexual with a family, and that my confidentiality was going to be total with them. I got permission from Dr. Sag, 1917 place, UAB, to go to the hospitals because many times the patients were at that point bedridden, they were dying, and they wanted to leave letters to their families and to their friends and to their loved ones. And but I thought it wonderful that even at that point, the doctors and the clinics and the hospitals were making absolutely sure that I wasn't going to use any of this material in any way for my own personal gain, and that it was going to be confidential, and it was between me and the speaker to come up with the letters or the stories, be given to them, and that would be the end of it. And I was so pleased to know that they were careful in checking me out